Good morning, folks. Welcome to another live stream on the Tim Moen Show. Let me just make sure that Rumble is broadcasting. I'm kind of new to broadcasting on Rumble, so I don't know how well it works. We'll see here. I don't see anything broadcasting there. Maybe I still suck at Rumble. Oh, no, there it is. There it is. Okay, it's just delayed. I'm going to have to shut that off. I don't want to hear my echo. Guys, welcome. Part 3. As you know, your boy here, if you've been watching my show or my consuming my podcast, for the last 60 days or so, I've been doing 75 hard things, 2-a-day workouts, sticking to a diet, no cheat meals, a gallon of water every day, no alcohol, reading 10 pages a day, which isn't that hard actually. But it's been 60 days of doing hard things, but none of them are as hard as what I'm about to do now, which is talk to a communist. We're going to talk to a communist and debate him. You're adding to my 75. You know what, Billy Bob? Nothing worthwhile is easy. Am I right? And I think you agree with me. And here we are doing hard things.
Yeah, I had no idea you were doing this workout. That puts me to shame. I'm lucky to get a little half workout in every couple, twice a week or something. So,
well, that's awesome. That's something. 60, I mean, I wasn't even doing that.
You're 60 days into your 75-day regimen.
Yeah, I think I'm on day 62 or something like that. So I'm on the home stretch, and I'll tell you, it's not the hard part. Was I came home from working a night shift last night. I walk in the door. My wife had hosted a Christmas party for her coworkers, so I had all these corrections nurses over at my house, and And my wife, if you know her, she's a neat freak. Like, she will not go to bed with the house messy at all. But I came in and there was stuff everywhere. There was plates of charcuterie and chips and all the stuff that are my triggers. Like, chips are like crack to me. If I have one, that's it. I'm off the rails. And so, I'm not going to lie. I had a handful of chips when I walked in. I couldn't help myself, but I punished myself with harder cardio. I almost thought about downing the whole bowl of chips and then just puking it up. I almost did the calculus there, thinking that might be worth it. Let's just say I now understand better how people can become bulimic. I think I get it now. But I don't know if I'm developing a healthier relationship with food in this whole process or not. It doesn't sound like it, but
I mean, it certainly will be an accomplishment at the end of 75 days. I mean, to stick to it and say you did it. It doesn't sound easy. Sounds like a tough commitment, but I mean, it shows the kind of guy you are, Tim, that you can do that. So that's pretty respectable.
I'm going to try. Oh, we got a guy from France checking in. Thanks. Right. I wonder what time it is over there, but thanks for putting some eyeballs on us, I guess. This was a last minute podcast. Billy reached out to me yesterday. We kind of planned to do something today, but I'm in between night shifts, so you never know. We didn't have any fires last night, so luckily your boy got some shut eye on the taxpayer dime. And thanks all you taxpayers out there for subsidizing my sleep last night. But we were able to put this up and do it without 30 minutes notice. So I understand we probably won't get a huge number of eyeballs. We'll try to do this with more notification next time, I think. But here we are again, Billy Bob, on our third installment here. How do you think things have been going so far? Have we been getting anywhere, or have we been doing anything productive?
I have been enjoying the discussions with you. My criticism and my angst is, I'm not really sure we've gotten anywhere, but I don't know if it's fair to get anywhere after just, 2-hour-long discussions. But my criticism, I think, of our discussions is we're not really being systematic in our approach.
Yeah.
We're kind of just all over the place.
Sure.
And we're not getting down to exactly, why we have, how our ideology is different, whose ideology best, corresponds with historic and contemporary reality, whose ideology is more likely to result in progress and, accomplishing the things that we can definitely accomplish as a species if we want to. So that was kind of my criticism. And I did send you a little I
Yeah,
kind of
you
just
sent me some questions. You've actually you've got quite a bit of writing here. I mean, we could go through that. Maybe a good place to start. Like you said, we've kind of been all over the map here, jumping from here to there. Maybe it would be good because I still don't have a good understanding of what communism is, at least from your perspective. I think I have an idea of what it is. I at least know what I've read about it or what I've heard about it. You know, but I think it would be good to hear it from a guy who actually is like you, who describes himself as a communist. What exactly is communism?
and how different that might be from your own understanding, you know.
Sure.
But yeah, no, that's it's a big question, and it's you know, it's not an easy answer, but I mean, I can definitely try and explain it. I hope not to put everyone to sleep.
Sure.
Um,
Well, I'll interject and try to get clarification as you go.
so, you know, ideology. What is ideology? Ideology is an understanding of our past in order to situate ourselves in the present, and to help us to better understand where we want to go in the future. So, you know, it's like a roadmap, kind of. I've heard that description, but that's basically the job of ideology. And you know, there's a lot of different ideologies. There's a lot of different understandings. You know, when I talk about ideology, though, I'm thinking of, you know,
I've never heard ideology described that way before, but I'll go with it for now. I'm not sure exactly how I describe ideology. Maybe as a belief system that informs your actions, and certainly that would, yeah, the past would come into play on it. Where you want to go. You know, Ludwig von Mises described human action as, you know, the steps you take in reality to achieve a future result, right? So you know, if I'm building a house, for example, if in my mind I have an idea of building a house, well, I might have a blueprint for that. I have to do certain things to make that happen. So you know, I don't know if I don't know if that is an ideology. Like if I'm going to build a house, I need to know, well, maybe what other people have done in the past to try to build shelter. And, you know, I have to envision what I want in the future, and then I have to engage in action. So my beliefs about, I guess, the past and the future, what you're saying, would put in context and kind of describe my human action, what I'm trying to do in the real world.
yeah.
Here's a question just to put a pin in, Billy Bob, if you're taking questions, because I asked Billy the communist position on Bitcoin and why. Maybe we can get to that in a bit, Legion Derek, once we understand a little bit more. We could get sidetracked very easily here, like we have in the past conversations.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting one. I'm not too excited about, you know, cryptocurrencies, but
yeah, because I think in the first thing you sent me, you know, you said the ultimate ideal of communism or goal is classless, cashless, borderless, stateless society. So Bitcoin kind of fits into the cash thing there. So I could see why you might be not thrilled about Bitcoin, because, but I mean, we'll get into that. I want to know why. Why do you want like all that stuff? So maybe just continue. So you're talking about ideology.
Yeah, so it's a way of understanding and interpreting history, in order to understand, you know, what is going on right now, and then knowing, you know, where we want to be, and that'll help us figure out how to get there. So I mean, to me, that's my best way to explain ideology. And so communism is specific. It says specific things about the past, and it says specific things about the present, and it has a specific objective to achieve in the future. And because of that, you know, certain things are necessary. Like you said, like with your blueprint for the house, certain steps are necessary. And that's why ideology is important, because the wrong ideology is not going to lead to where you want to go.
Right.
But to get specific,
and so already, Billy Bob, some of the resistance I'm feeling in my mind is, okay, there's this kind of master plan, and if I don't fit into that master plan, well, I'm collateral damage, right? Like my ancestors were in Stalinist Russia, for example, kind of railroading over top of them was necessary for the greater good or the plan. That's where my mind's going. Correct me if I'm wrong, but is that?
And so that's really a good that's a good microcosm of the kind of thing that we're discussing, and the kinds of things that make me, as a communist, not see libertarianism as a progressive ideology, as an ideology that's capable of overcoming what we need to overcome in order to progress to the future.
No,
So
is that because we're not willing to infringe on the individual?
well, yes.
Okay.
So I mean, and that's, that goes back to ideology. So for instance, so we've talked about the historical progression, and we've kind of had agreement that the historical progression from feudalism to capitalism was definitely a progress. And there was
we might disagree on why that was progress, though, right? Like, you might agree it was progress because, I don't know, we achieved more abundance or something like that, whereas I would see it as progress because we achieved more individual rights. Like, we stepped into the realm where individuals could now be property owners, and it wasn't just fiat. I plant a flag and then I hand out title to lords based on my divine right from God or something like that.
Right. Well, yeah. So when I talk about progress, I mean, I'm just talking about really quality of life, for human beings. So that includes, life expectancies increasing, technology advancing, access to material goods. So I mean, basic quality of life. So I mean, and we had agreement that feudalism was, a condition that could have been improved upon, and capitalism definitely improved upon that position. But I imagine if I was a capitalist and I was talking to Tim Moen, the feudalist, you could have complained that capitalism threw my family off their estate, and that wasn't fair. And I don't like capitalism.
Sure.
I oppose capitalism because it didn't honor my family's estate that we'd owned, and it really wrecked things. Or a slave owner, you could say the same thing about a slave owner.
Sure.
So the French Revolution was overthrew the French monarchy and instituted the beginnings of capitalism.
Well, maybe we should pause on that and point out that that yes, people are self-interested, and so they tend to ex post facto justify what benefits them, using whatever sophistry they can, right? And so they'll come up with good arguments to explain why we can't change them. Of course, we see that now. People in the oligopoly, right? Politicians and corporate masters that are close to politicians certainly don't want much of a change in the status quo. If anything, they want to entrench their power and wealth even more by oppressing us. And so they'll describe how this pandemic is going to kill us, or how terrorism is a huge threat, or how global climate catastrophe is on the verge of happening. Therefore, cede all your power to us and fall more in line with the greater good type thing. But and so to me, the reason we need to have a rational belief system is specifically to counteract that, right? Otherwise, how do we know that our belief system isn't just rooted in self-interest at the expense of others or something? Would that be fair?
I mean, I'm not going to have any problem with what you just said. I mean, it is important. I mean, I'm just not sure what you're implying, really. But I mean, I agree with what was said. I mean, having a belief system to know, to have discernment regarding any political movement is important. But so I'm talking about my ideology of communism and how we see the past, and then and I understand that libertarianism has its own belief system grounded in certain principles, but it's kind of it's outside. It doesn't incorporate the worldview of communism. And so,
Yeah.
So what you said, I have no problem with. I'm just not sure
Yeah,
how it's.
I guess I'm just looking like libertarians look at the past and the present and think about the future as well, right? And we, but we analyze it through probably different lens than you do, right? We look at, okay, how much how much was a system violating individual rights, or how much was it violating the individual in the past, and how much is it doing so now, and how can we get to a future where less of that is happening? And you probably look at it through a bit of a different lens, like the individual is maybe lower on the triage list than something else. So I guess getting to those higher values is what I'm interested in doing. Like, what is?
I mean, it's two different perspectives in a sense. So again, if the libertarians keep saying, and you do keep saying, the individual, well, then I ask, so the capitalists should have just surrendered to the feudalists and allowed feudalism to continue in perpetuity, because we cannot, the rights, the property rights of the individual is sacrosanct, and we had no right to overthrow the monarchy. So, I mean, that's what I'm hearing when I hear you constantly going back to, it's the individual rights, their right to their person, their property. And I'm saying there's other considerations, given the contextual reality, that often supersede the individual rights. And I think that's obvious. And I think that's missed on libertarians, because they're hyper.
And what are those? What are those things? I guess is what.
Okay.
I'm
Well,
trying to.
we could either advance from feudalism to capitalism, or we can violate some individual rights. Transition from feudalism to capitalism, or we can stay in feudalism. So you could stay in feudalism,
right, but we're not violating individual rights by transitioning,
go ahead.
though. We're recognizing it, right? That would be my take on that. I mean,
say that again. I missed it.
I'm the transition from feudalism to capitalism wasn't trampling on individual rights. It was recognizing it. It was recognizing that, hey, everyone has a right to own property, not just feudal lords. And so we could talk about how we get there. Whether that's through violent revolution or not, but I don't think you're violating rights if you don't own property and you're essentially enslaving people, or what would you call enclosing them or something like that. Then that is aggressing against them. So this is recognizing. Now, obviously, I'd prefer to get there in a peaceful way. Feudal lords, could what do you call it? What's the opposite of annex? Whatever they can give out the land, or they can sell the land, or at least they can allow the peasants to start owning land and recognize the property rights in what they're homesteading, instead of saying, no, I own this because the king told me I own this, because God told him he has the power to tell me I own this. We're getting away from that now into more.
Definitely, feudal. There was, personal rights, personal property was not respected during the capitalist revolution. So there was victims. The monarchy, the church. Well, not so much the church, but more so the monarchy was definitely trampled on. And so, but let me go ahead and just continue and progressing my getting us to the present time. But I mean, I hear what you're saying, but it's kind of not really addressing the point. So I'm saying the monarchies were not respected. They, it's a revolution. It was a violent revolution. There was coercion. There was authoritarian use of force against the monarchy to overthrow that system and to implement a different kind of system, which was better. But the property rights and the rights to not be aggressed against.
But Billy Bob, none of that goes against libertarianism, though, right? Okay. You understand that?
No. Okay. So no, that's what I mean. I definitely want to not, tell you what you think. I want you to tell me. So I appreciate that. But as we move forward on our timeline, I mean, my assertion is that paradigm continues to play itself out over history. So, you know, feudalism gave way to capitalism in a violent, bloody revolution.
Sure.
And we've seen about 100 years ago where capitalism started giving way to socialism, you know, via revolution. And why is it always a revolution? Is it because capitalism is violent? No. Is it because socialism is violent? No. It's because the entrenched powers that are the primary beneficiaries of the status quo do not want to allow the system to progress, because that progression is going to mean less for them and more for the majority. So it's all about democracy, right, about the best interests of the masses. And it's about progressing from one system to a better system, and then from this system to a better system. And it's always the same thing, because within that system, you have people that benefit from the status quo, resist change, shoot JFK, assassinate our president because he was doing change. You know, he was going to change things in a way. So, you know, I just threw that out there for
okay.
For
but some violent revolution or violent action you would judge as immoral, though, correct? Like how would you judge whether a violent action was moral or immoral?
I mean, okay. To me, it's obvious. I mean, you have to look at the context. You can't do it without understanding the context and making an individual rational assessment. And libertarianism.
Okay. But by what standards do you make that assessment, or by what guidelines, or like how would you go about judging an act? Is it?
Yeah, I mean, and
if 100 years in the future you got
silver bullet, and libertarianism pretends there's a silver bullet to doing that, and there's not. And I think that's liberalism in a nutshell. It's this pretense that there's some kind of a universal ethic that can be applied everywhere at every time, and you can figure out what's right or wrong by applying this ethic. And it's
well,
really,
you can say what's wrong. You might not be able to say what's right, but you can get pretty close to saying what's wrong, right? I mean, violence to protect the individual is justifiable, but violence to impose on the individual isn't really.
Well, I mean, I can give you a scenario where it's the right thing to do, you know? So, and we have the first episode, we talked about, you know, if there's a man drowning in a lake and a guy with a life preserver refuses to throw it because it's his property and he doesn't give a fuck about that guy. That's not right. So,
but Billy Bob, that's not what we're talking about. We're adding a third party in here, and we're saying I'm the moral arbiter of this. And if you don't throw that life preserver out there, I'm going to shoot you in the head, and I will throw it out there. And so the claim here, the extraordinary moral claim that I'm criticizing, that libertarians criticize, is the third party saying I will shoot you in the head to make sure this guy gets that life preserver.
Okay. Well, I would add to that illustration, and I would just say, I mean, to make that illustration more accurate, I would say you're going to shoot the one guy in the head to save 1,000 people. So let's say that's going to be my new thing. And I'm going to, you know, it's a cost benefit analysis. Do I let 1,000 people die, or do we sacrifice? So again,
but but here's the context though. And like you said, context matters. So is it that that individual put those 1,000 people in harm's way, and you're killing them so that they're not in harm's way? Or did those 1,000 people put themselves in harm's way, and you're going to kill that individual to save that 1,000 people? I think those are two very different contexts, right?
Yeah. And I mean, to me, that's going a bit far with the analogy. I'm not sure, you know.
Well, I don't think it is, but I think that's where our fundamental disagreement might be, right? Because, you know, you might say, for example, my ancestors, you know, hacking a farm out of the Siberian wilderness and bringing it to the point of flourishing, and you know, that they were somehow standing in the way of progress and therefore had to go. That's a very different thing than my ancestors were enslaving people on this farm and they had to go, right? In one case, you're saying, well, that farm has to go to industrialize farming so that more people can flourish. And in another sand, you're saying, I'm saving 1,000 people that they have enslaved on their farm to set those people free. I would say one is moral, one is immoral.
Yeah. and what I would say, I mean, if we're going to talk about the actual historical context, I would say that it was the typical situation where you have a minority of well-off people who are happy with a system that is broken because they are beneficiaries of that system, and they violently resist improvement to that system, because improvement necessitates that they will no longer have their position of privilege. And so that's what we see throughout history. That's what happened with the capitalist revolution, with overthrowing the feudalist system. We came into a better place. And so it's the same thing in Russia. Like with the Tsar was overthrown, he was like a feudalist, hereditary monarchy kind of thing. Russia was backwards. It was underdeveloped. It was illiterate. It had no electricity, and it had a very inadequate farming system, a very inadequate agricultural system to produce food for the population. And it was just replete with cyclical famines over and over and over again. And so any responsible government of the people that comes to power is responsible to fix that. So when they tried to work with the wealthy landowners who controlled the food, manufacturing part of the state, they absolutely refused to negotiate or refused to relinquish their special domain. And they instead chose to go to war with the state. And they, a lot of them.
But well, my ancestors didn't go to war with the state. They were pacifists, and they gave. They were very charitable. They gave and gave, and they were actually happy to give. But they got to a point where they were starving because they were taking so much, and they simply couldn't produce enough. And so they, and they're, like said, their rest of their family got put into work camps where they died. They fled, barely made it out with their lives. So it wasn't like they were resisting anything. I mean, they were giving to the point where, there was nothing left to give but their life. And I think that was a story for a lot of people then. There was a lot of innocent people that were caught up in, I guess not. Well, I don't know. I mean, these were people that were even trying to go along with it. I mean, my great grandfather even wrote that it seemed like a great idea at the time, to each according to their need, from each according to their ability. It kind of fell in line with his Christian ethic of sharing, because they were very, believed in sharing. And but there could never be enough sharing to satisfy the ruling class. And
there wasn't enough food being produced, so people were starving and dying.
Right. Yeah.
That was the situation, and that was the situation that the government was doing their best to try and fix. So, I mean, Tim, I don't really. I mean, I have empathy for you, and I can't speak to what specifically happened to them. I'm speaking generally of my understanding of the historical situation at that time, and like, I do not want to disparage or tell you that you're. Sure. Grandparents.
No, I get that. I'm just trying to get at trying to understand, I guess, how you make these moral calculations between what's right and wrong. And I think I like to look at concrete kind of examples at a kind of more high fidelity level, right? Like it's one thing to talk, they say it's one thing to talk about the nation as if it's a thing that isn't just a bunch of individuals, and think that, well, the nation had this route to go, and therefore, the individuals, I guess, are, I don't know, meaningless. You make some kind of calculation about, the ruling elite, and they're calculating how many people can survive, how many, how much collateral damage is acceptable to ensure the greater good. And I just don't know how you make those calculations rationally, or how you can predict,
Yeah. And so, and again, I think, you're struggling you really want to come up with a system that you don't have to think about, that you can just apply, where there's no room for disagreement. If you apply this system, that's the answer. And I think,
well, I'm not looking for a system. You know, I don't know what it would look like if you abolish slavery, how cotton's going to get picked. Like I said, I don't know what that system of farming looks like in the absence of slavery. I just know that you shouldn't enslave people, right? And you shouldn't hurt people or take their stuff either. And you know, the stuff that's justly owned.
But again, so you're going back to this universal principle, and if you apply that universal principle to feudalism, we would never move past feudalism, because we wouldn't take the stuff of the feudalists.
No, I'm applying that universal. No, I'm applying that to feudalism and saying, yes, it was justified. It was justified because those people were aggressing, right? The king was aggressing against his subjects, against the people. And, you know, the people were defending themselves from that force, from that violence, from that imposition. And so that kind of violence is justified because it's defensive. And so that's
more sympathetic to the wealthy landowners who refused to allow an inadequate agricultural system to be improved upon, and ended up burning their crops and their livestock, and causing, you know, making a famine a lot worse than it would otherwise have been, and refusing to allow the revolutionary government that, you know, the people supported in overthrowing the czar system and brought to power to do just that, to start running the country, you know, for the benefit of the masses instead of the benefit of the wealthy elite. So the you know, the allegations against the rich, wealthy landowners that grew all the food was that they would get fat off famine. They liked famine because guess what? That made their commodities more expensive and they made more money. So they were accused of getting fat off of famine, and that had just gone on for a long time. And so the government that came to power said, we're not going to do that. We need to improve the system. And ultimately, it's unfortunate that the rich landowners weren't okay with, you know, accommodating them or coming to some agreement. Just like the feudalists refused to come to some agreement, they had to be overthrown. They violently resisted. So we have the same thing right now today. We have a ruling establishment that does not want to start telling the truth, doesn't want to start using the media to be honest. It's continuing and perpetuating its lies and its violent, you know, authoritarian empire around the world with 800 military bases, because it doesn't want to, you know, give up its power and allow a better, more, you know, more humane, a better system that's going to be more, it's going to going to facilitate human flourishing in a better way. So, I mean,
okay, so you won't find any disagreement, I think, with my audience or me when you look at the current state of affairs and you see that there's a ruling class, right? There's a ruling elite, and this is made up of politicians and, you know, to a large part, corporations, multinational corporations that are close to those political interests. And we see that that's resulting in oppression, loss of freedom, loss of flourishing and abundance that would otherwise occur if that weren't the case. So what is the communist solution, I guess, to this?
Well, you know, and so fortunately we have history as a guide. Again, you know, feudalism gave way to capitalism, which was progress. It was better for humanity. Capitalism allowed a lot of development, a lot of great things that weren't possible under feudalism. I believe in the same way, socialism, you know, is a superior, and it's a progress from capitalism, because to me, capitalism is when the wealthy people, it's not hereditary monarchies, but it's a coalition of wealthy people, the ownership class. So they're the ones that are the ruling class in the West. And so
now what you're describing to me sounds like corporatist. You know, I would distinguish corporatism from capitalism.
Yes.
Do you see a distinction between the two, or are they one and the same?
So, I mean, of course, I've engaged in this paradigm innumerably. Sure. And I mean, to me, it's kind of silly, because corporatism is only capitalism, how it's always existed. It probably always will exist. Right. It probably always can exist.
So capitalism requires state power, I guess, to entrench those monopolies, essentially.
Yeah, I mean, capitalism can't exist without a state because there's inequalities and you have to have a state to protect property rights, to enforce contracts. I would say to help build infrastructure and, even defining property, but laws, a system of laws and law enforcement has to exist, or capitalism doesn't exist, and capitalism gives way to the law of the jungle, the rule of the powerful, and that's it. And so, of course, capitalism kind of is that because it's the wealthy and powerful that are ruling. It's better than feudalism, but it's still, there's room for progress. But no, I appreciate that you see it as corporatism. And again, when I engage with that paradigm with libertarians, I say that I've never seen the capitalism you describe. I've never seen. So I just
Yeah,
call corporatism capitalism.
gotcha.
But as for what we want to advocate for, I think I've seen progress. So it was only about 100 years ago that we had the first, socialist experiments, and we had the people overthrowing, the ruling class and implementing socialism. So, and I would argue that, people in the West have been lied to about that legacy, about what happened, about, really everything. And I mean, there's, it's objectively true that the Cold War and, the death tolls and things like that were, we know now were exaggerated by a factor of 20. And also there's the context. But what I would say is, socialism isn't about violence. It's not about, coercion or authoritarianism. It's about improving society so that the masses can, increase their quality of lives. We have more opportunities, and we're able to achieve things that capitalism just constrains us and keeps us from ever hoping to achieve, because it's just wealthy people pursuing profit, and they're not actually trying to do anything other than that. Profit comes first. I'm kind of all over.
Yeah,
the
no,
place.
okay, no, I think we're hitting on something, and I think that again, I would describe. So let me give you an example of maybe a distinction I would make between capitalism and corporatism. So in Canada, before cannabis was legalized, we had kind of a gray market in cannabis in the lower West Coast, where the local government said, we're not going to prosecute growers, we're not going to prosecute distributors and dispensers of cannabis. And so what you saw was a vibrant kind of economy of mom and pop shops, some of them smaller, some of them bigger, some were getting to near industrial size operations. But then when cannabis was legalized, what we saw was corporatism, because Health Canada had to issue the license. So they cracked down on all these mom and pop shops. They said, you cannot grow cannabis. I think there was a white paper that came out that said the government will only issue something like 42 licenses. And of course, those went to Trudeau, guys like Trudeau's CAO of his election campaign, people that were connected to government and could afford to spend, the millions of dollars to overcome regulatory hurdles. Those were the ones that got the license to grow cannabis, and everyone else was put out of business. So to me, capitalism is just letting people do their thing, grow their plants and sell them and scale up as they could afford to, how they wanted. Corporatism was what we have now. And I guess socialism would be, what would be workers owning the means of production, right? So I guess that these mom and pop shops that started their grows in a socialist environment, they would have to hand over control to the people that they had employed or something. And that's the progress, or am I
mean, what I see in your explanation is that, certain fundamental realities and context are not nowhere to be seen within your explanation or within your question. So the reality is that in the West, we're a government of by and for the wealthy elites. And so within that, underneath that government, within that framework, some things happen temporarily that are good. So you described how temporarily there was a system where it was more grassroots, it was less regulated, and people all over the place were allowed temporarily to grow and sell their cannabis in a relatively unregulated market, and you like that. So I mean, I get that. You're asking me about socialism. Well, socialism is the overthrow of this ruling establishment and the implementation of a government that is of, by, and for the people. And I think there's historical precedents where that has happened, and that's going to be a very contentious discussion because
Right.
you've been, I would say, indoctrinated to oppose those governments that I would say are doing the right thing by their people and are good governments that we ought to not necessarily emulate, but again,
and how do you get, because I get this from there's a People's Party in Canada, populists that believe the same thing, that government ought to be of, for, and by the people and serve the people. But I always have trouble wrapping my mind around. Now they would probably have stark disagreement with you. They're like a right-wing populist party that use the same terminology, but I think you have probably vastly different ideas of what the government should do for the people. How do you know government's by the people, and how do you know it's for the people? Like, what metrics do you use? How do you figure out this is what people want and that sort of thing?
So, I mean, it's the same thing. I mean, libertarians want to, identify and grab hold of the non-existent silver bullet that's going to make that clear. And there's just not. You have to look at every case. You have to look at the context. You have to make a rational decision. I mean, that's it. There's no silver bullet. There's not going to be. And we ought to stop pretending there is. So what I'm saying is,
well, and just to be clear, Billy Bob, I think I thought I made it clear in the last one. I don't think there's a silver bullet either. I think that there's just moving in the right direction. And
well, so the implication I kind of heard the implication in the question was that, there is a way, and what's your way? And I'm saying there isn't a way, but basically, there was a lot of socialist revolutions. So there was revolutionary leaders that talked about what I'm talking about, that talked about the ruling class wanting to maintain a system that is not beneficial to the vast majority. It's only beneficial to them, and the ruling class's resistance to change. So that was the language of Lenin. That was the language of Stalin. That was the language of Mao. So they got people rally to their cause.
I think it was the language of Hitler and Mussolini as well.
No, not even close, Tim.
I'm pretty sure.
That's not even close to true. So Hitler's language was, we're the Aryans and we're better than the Jews. We're better than the blacks. We're going to create a living space. We're going to take over the Slavs because they're subhuman. We're going to get living space for us. And that's what they did. So Tim, it's important. It's a very important distinction. That is not at all what Hitler said. So, I mean, you got to appreciate that. It's totally different.
But that's what every ruler says. I mean, they say they're doing this for the people. They're saying they're against the ruling elite. That's certainly what the right-wing populist party preach as well, right? That they're against the ruling elite, and and we're against them too. I mean, libertarians don't want the ruling elite either. I guess the devil's kind of in the details.
Now your implication is nihilism. Your implication of what you just said is that we can't know. We just can't know. And what I'm saying is we have to use our judgment. We have to use our discernment. We have to evaluate both arguments. We have to evaluate what they're actually doing. And when I do that, I'm a Marxist-Leninist because I see what Lenin did made sense. I see what Stalin did was great for the people of the Soviet Union, was great for humanity. And then what I saw what Mao did in China, what Xi is doing now in China is, tremendous. And I say, thank God that China is demonstrating what a government of, by, and for the people. So that's very controversial. I understand most listeners have been.
I would say it's pretty controversial. I mean, we'd probably have to spend 6 hours untangling all that because I guess from your perspective, I've been propagandized in a very different version of goodness in those countries. But okay, let's for the moment say that you're correct, that that these strong men were needed to do reforms, and those reforms involved necessarily killing millions of people for the greater good.
So I mean, you can explain the indoctrination that I was subjected to, and that we've all been subjected to. And I mean, I get that, but of course I have a different opinion. So I think, I have a defense of my position, and I understand the establishment position that's been shoved down all of our throats regarding, communism, regarding Soviet Union and China. And again, when I actually investigated it, I found out that I was being lied to, and I found out everything I've really been taught in school turns out to be a lie when I actually research and find out, exactly what happened. And so that's why I have the beliefs I do. But I mean, I can tell you very quickly. I mean, Mao came to power in 1949. He left in about 1973, 74, 75, 76. He died. Maybe it was 76 that he died. But so over that time frame, the life expectancy had almost doubled. It started at 35. It ended around a little bit less than 70. So the life expectancy doubled. The population doubled. And, the amount of food that was produced in China, like, doubled. So, I would make the case that no one in all of recorded history has done more good for more people than Mao. And how is he known in the West? In the West, he's known as the greatest mass murderer of all time. So these things are two distinct opposites. It's polar opposites. And I think the facts prove that I am correct, because he wasn't a mass murderer. He didn't kill millions of people. He actually, population doubled. That's just a fact. That's just a fact. You know what I'm saying? The population doubled while Mao was in charge. The life expectancy doubled while Mao was. The amount of food they produced in China doubled while Mao was in charge.
Right.
So I think you're being lied to, and I think people are embracing these lies because they don't know any better, and everybody believes the lies. So there's no pushback to these lies. Everybody just accepts them as true and doesn't even think to question them. But explain to me how what I just described is objective facts. That same man can be considered the greatest mass murderer of all time. I'll tell you how: through dishonest demographic statistical manipulation. By dishonest.
Well, I mean, the population doubled. It could have doubled even if he killed millions of people, right? It might have been higher had he not killed them. We don't know that.
So again, but the success.
But you're saying he didn't even kill a bunch of people.
Why would he kill somebody? So again, I'm telling you, Mao was fighting, on behalf of the people to overcome a system that was not in the benefit of the people, right? He had a civil war with Chiang Kai-shek, who was backed by the United States, and he defeated Chiang, forced him to flee to Taiwan, and he implemented a government of by and for the Chinese people. And Chiang Kai-shek was going to implement a capitalist system that was an ally, a lapdog of Western imperialism. Just like we have in a lot of countries right now, we have a lot of, governments in place that do what we say to the detriment of their own population. Like that's imperialism. So that's what the U.S. wanted in China, and that's why we fought against Mao and tried to support Chiang, but he lost. And so fortunately, we have this best example of socialism in action, where it came to power. It overcame the attempts of imperialism and capitalism to dominate the country and the government. It overcame that, implemented a government of, by, and for the people. And the success has been, impossible to overstate. Like if you have any idea how successful and how
my understanding of China now is that they implemented quite a few capitalist reforms. Is that wrong? Or like in what way is it socialist?
Well, in the way that I just described. So what is socialism, right? It's defeating a government of, by, and for the wealthy elite. It's putting in a government of, by, and for the people, and it's implementing policies based on what's in the best interest of the vast majority instead of what's in the best interest of the wealthy elite. So that's socialism. And so under socialism, once you have political power in control, political power in the hands of a party that is legitimately interested in furthering the interests of the people as opposed to a wealthy elite, you can implement policies that benefit the people. So Mao, I can read you a quote from Mao in 1949 where he says, "We need capitalism. We're worse than feudalism. We're below feudalism. We have to do capitalism long before we can, what's that word? Run the means of production with the workers." You know what I'm saying? So we need a long time of capitalist development to develop productive forces, to build our economy. And then maybe in the future, we could advance to a more, fundamental socialist, like where we don't have private owners. But capitalism is a necessary step. You can't jump from feudalism to socialism.
Okay.
Capitalism is a necessary in between. So
But
in 1949, that's what Mao was saying.
Right, right. Okay, gotcha. So capitalism is a necessary stage to get to full socialism, but you still described what is happening in China now as socialism because it's of, by, and for the people. That be fair? Well, how do you know if the government is of, by, and for the people? Like, how do you determine that? Like, is our government of, by, and for the people? Or?
What are the results of their policies?
Right. So what would a policy be that makes it by for the people or something like that? What would be an example?
So, I mean, I would say investment in things that benefits people's lives, jobs, infrastructure, healthcare, education, making sure that, their needs are being met and that, they have a good quality of life, increasing quality of life for the vast majority. So,
but isn't that happening in Western countries as well that aren't expressly socialist?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm glad you asked. So, the West is an imperialist, project. So you've got NATO, you've got the US was really the dominant power after World War II. And the Cold War essentially was the US waging war all around the developing world in order to put in governments to allow us to exploit those resources and markets. So that's what the capitalists want to do. That's what the imperialists want to do in the West is, enrich themselves, dominate the planet, and exploit whoever they want to exploit. So it's true that citizens like you and me in these imperial core countries have a pretty good standard of living relative to, say, Haiti, relative to, say, Guatemala or Indonesia. So they want to keep us governable. They want to keep us placated. They want to keep us distracted, confused, and out of their business while they're doing the business of empire and exploiting these countries. So the problem I have is not that my quality of life isn't good, because if they offered my quality of life to everybody on the planet, I would be the biggest supporter of capitalism. You understand? Okay. But that's not my quality of life comes at the expense of the third world, the developing countries that don't have access to the goods that I have. And so I understand I'm being bribed.
What do you make out of what do you make of the argument? I think Steven Pinker's made this and a few other people that international free trade and division of labor capitalism, as I might describe it, has increased the standard of living, brought over 1 billion people above the poverty line in the last 10 years or something like that. Like there's been a period of human flourishing unprecedented because of that. And so, yes, you look at sweatshops in some of these developing nations and maybe even child labor, and you say, well, this is horrific compared to us for sure. But compared to where they were, it's an improvement. It's better to be a child worker in a factory than a child prostitute, for example. And these people are choosing to work there rather than live their, subsistence dawn till dusk, working, just trying to scrape survival out of the wilderness type living. What do you make of that?
So, I mean, you're asserting that, number one, there's a free market, and I don't think that's true. I don't think what we have...
I'm not asserting there's a free market, but I'm asserting that there's trade happening and opportunities result from that and division of labor, right? But
no, trade is definitely good.
Smith. Yeah.
I'm all, socialism isn't anti-trade. So I'm not sure, I agree. Trade is beneficial. The U.S. currently has, sanctions and embargoes, economic sanctions to try and force the political capitulation of like 40 different governments currently. So they're really not about freedom. I mean, they sell it like that. And then so the other assertion is that, the ruling class is implementing these policies to better the third world, to better the poor.
Well, I'm not asserting that, but
it's kind of implied. It's kind of look at what their system is doing, and it's good. Yeah. And I'm saying, no, it's not. Number one, it's not free trade. Number two,
it's managed trade. It'd be better if it was free.
Good, but some countries are regressing. I mean, sub-Saharan Africa, has gotten worse. I mean, what we did in Libya made it worse. What we did in Afghanistan made it worse. So,
okay. I don't.
when I
Can we
look
go?
around the planet, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I want to get some of the audience here. They've been waiting with some comments for a while. Here's a question
Let me
from.
just make the last point I wanted to make.
Sure.
Was when I see where the most progress has been made for the fastest, most efficient increase in quality of life, it's China. Hands down, it's China, both by magnitude,
Right.
number of people, and the rapid development and the most efficient improvement in quality of life. So they are number one by a long shot.
Right.
And guess what? They also happen to be a communist government that does not have the West trying to keep their boot on them, economically speaking, because in 1973, they ended the embargo, they ended the sanctions against China and allowed China to deal freely with the world. And look what they've done. Look what a government of by for the people has accomplished.
Well, look what a capitalist reforms have done, right? I mean, they've taken the shackles off the market there, and look at all the flourishing that's happening. And they've created a place where U.S. corporations can manufacture goods for cheaply because they don't have the same regulatory hurdles that
why
they face
do it
producing
more efficiently
things
than any other country? Because they're definitely not the only country that did capitalist reforms.
No, and I would say that I mean a century of regulation in the U.S. has whittled away the manufacturing class. But let's to some questions here.
I do want to address your point, because I mean you made the assertion that it was due to these capitalist reforms, and I'm saying the capitalist reforms obviously helped, and that's why the communist government agreed to do them, because it was best for the people. But there's a lot of non-communist governments that don't care about the people that do capitalist reforms, and the people don't benefit. So it's not capitalist reforms that's the variable here. The variable is that it's a communist government of, for, and by the people. There are a lot of governments did capitalist reforms, but they're capitalist governments, they're crony governments, they're like poodles of the West, and just in it to enrich themselves and extract wealth from their people to Western corporations. And that's why the capitalist reforms in those countries haven't worked nearly as good as they've worked in China. But I'm sorry, Tim, I just had to say that. So let's definitely get to these questions.
Justin Turdo says, how is a socialist dictatorship more of, by, and for the people than democracy with a constitution based on individual rights?
Well, we have a constitution based on individual rights in this country. And we also have a military establishment with 800 military bases that, has been at perpetual war and has engaged in hundreds of, election riggings, hundreds of assassinations. We've averaged an overthrow of a government a year for the past 75 years, Yeah. So that's what we have now. And it can be better. There's room for improvement. So I'm about improvement. And I want to, and our government isn't of, before, and by the people. Like everybody ought to recognize that. So we have a constitution, and we say that we claim to these liberal values of, embracing individuality and the individual and protecting property rights. But that's not the key, right? Because that's actually a facade used by the ruling elite to maintain their power and to convince everybody, oh, you're free, you're free. And then they brainwash us with their nonstop, propaganda nonsense.
But let's take the good faith version of his question there and say, if we had if we had a democracy of, by, and for the people with a constitution based on individual rights, thou shalt not infringe my right to bear arms and my free speech and blah, blah, blah. How is that not a democracy or better than a dictatorship, socialist dictatorship? Wouldn't that be more by the people and for the people if people are directly voting on like a direct democracy type situation? Or no, because the people are propagandized and dumb and don't know what's good for them.
So, so there's an issue, right? There's an issue with, free markets result in competition, right? And what does competition do? Competition results in winners and losers. And ultimately, the winners of the market competition start to amass wealth. And the more wealth they amass, the greater advantage they have in the marketplace. And the more wealth they amass, the more political influence they amass. And then eventually they're just going to utilize that influence, like it's inevitable, to take over the political power. So it's a struggle.
Which is why we got to get rid of political power.
But in China, you've got billionaires, but you also have a very powerful central party that understands, and their whole dialectic is about talking about what I'm talking about. That you have a rule class, so they have 5 stars on their flag. The big star is the working class. The capitalists are a star, and they have the petite bourgeoisie. So they have like 4 other stars, different classes. But they're saying, hey, we're of, by, and for the working class. That's what the big star is, and they're cognizant about the efforts of the wealthy to to develop a political force to take political power and start running the country in the interest of the wealthy elites.
Well, I think you're preaching to the choir here on this one, actually, Billy Bob, because this is what I hear right-wing populists say they want too, right? They want a government that is not beholden to these big corporations, the Googles, the Facebooks, the social media giants, the big pharma companies, right? And they say, we want to a government that understands this and that restricts us, and that's for us, that lets us have the freedom to engage in capitalism like China. Make us more like China is what they should be maybe saying. What would the difference be then between a right-wing populist party and what's happening in China? Because it sounds like they're essentially the same thing.
So I would first say that, I'm glad we're on agreement. And I really honestly believe, Tim, I believe that communism as I know it, everybody, like, you're a communist, you just don't know it. And you've been maybe a little bit confused. This is so
I think you're a libertarian and just don't know it. That's the assumption I always go in.
That's why this is a great discussion, because, the way I see things, like, I think everybody can embrace it. I think what keeps people from embracing it is, this indoctrination against the word socialist, the word communist. And I think that indoctrination comes from, again, this ruling elite who have a vested interest in manipulating and obfuscating people's perceptions, getting them not to understand the reality, the basic reality that I'm explaining, how, you end up with a small wealthy elite that run things in their own benefit to the detriment of everybody else. And it's our job as the people to overthrow that and implement, a government that is of, for, and by the people. So China did that successfully. But the thing is, they talk about, ownership and property, and so the means of production are the things within society that society needs to exist. And so why should those things be, produced and sold for profit? Isn't there maybe a better way to look at things? Hey, society needs these anyways. Maybe a better way than allowing some individual to profit off of them. We come with some system where, we can, it's not curtailed by that process, because you're really limited when you're just doing things for profit. If something's not profitable, you can't do it. But there might be a lot of great things to do that aren't necessarily profitable. But within capitalism, those things don't ever get done. And so it's just like identifying, hey, this is our society. These are our needs. What are we gonna do? And there's definitely a place. So China, there's definitely a place for capitalism right now, and developing the economy, developing the productive forces. But eventually they're going to say, hey, we're going to benefit, these changes that we're going to implement are going to benefit the vast majority. Now, if they don't benefit the vast majority, I would say then they're not socialist. Like, what they're doing is wrong. And that could be, for instance, a lot of Western communists that I would say aren't communists say China is capitalist. China's capitalist. They have not abolished the private ownership of the means of production. I reject China. I reject China's socialist capitalist communist party. They're no different than the U.S. And so those are the blue-haired communists with often 42 genders that I disagree with. So does that help? Does that help understand?
I think so. I think what you're describing is like communism is kind of the natural progression that occurs after a certain amount of capitalism has been after capitalism and the productivity that occurs in capitalism, with people incentivized, I guess, by the profit motive to produce more and more. And then at a certain point, it just kind of naturally shifts to communism. Would that be fair to say? Or
well, no, I mean, I would say capitalism results in inequality, a wealth inequality, and a power inequality. And then those few, the wealthy few, start resisting change. They take political power and they are resistant to change, to necessary change that benefits the people. So the changes that I think need to happen right now are an end to imperialism, an end to perpetual war, an end to our 800 military bases around the world, an end to the Western capitalist effort of dominating the globe and achieving full spectrum dominance over the globe.
But I guess what I'm getting at is in China, which is, you know, the country we're kind of talking about, it's going through a capitalist phase here. At what point does that shift then to something like communism?
So my definition, my 2-sentence definition of communism or socialism, because I use those words interchangeably. I know different people have different views. You can say socialism is the transition from capitalism to communism. The middle place is socialism. That's okay too. But I kind of see, you know, I kind of treat those two words the same. But essentially, it's identifying the best interests of the vast majority, identifying what those interests are, and then developing a strategy to pursue those interests, given an ever-changing, you know, kaleidoscope of material conditions. So those material conditions are always changing around the world and in any given society. Like material conditions are people's opinions, it's other powers on the planet. There's all kinds of, you know, the resources you have access to, et cetera, et cetera. So the material conditions are just the, you know, basically the context within which you are operating. But if you're a socialist, you're trying to identify what's in the best interest of the majority. You're coming up with a plan to achieve those interests, but that plan is determined by the material conditions that exist. And it's not a dogma. It's not an implementation of a dogma where, hey, we're just going to abolish the ownership of the means of production. We're not going to let anybody.
Is it in your view kind of a natural progression, or is it something that requires the imposition of an iron boot or something like that to occur?
Well, I think, you know, under capitalism,
in China, where you have kind of a flourishing economy now, according to you, and things chugging along at a great progress, in large part because of the capitalism machinery that is going. Does that naturally shift to communism, or does it have to be directed there by government and by force of some type?
Well, it'll be interesting. Right now, you know, I'm not seeing any need to change. So the way I see things, like China is doing really well. China is obviously the future. Like if you just look at economics, you know, share of global market, you know, size, manufacturing capability, like China is the future, and the West is undoubtedly in decline. So I think as the West declines, what China will be able to do will you know, the amount of opportunity they have to advance will increase. Like right now, China is dependent on the capitalist model. They're dependent on, you know, Western investment into their economy, and also, you know, they're constrained by imperialism. But I think China's interested in, you know, developing the underdeveloped world, whereas the United States, the West, has been interested in keeping the underdeveloped world underdeveloped and exploitable, right? We haven't tried to develop those countries. We haven't tried to put in a government that's going to do the best thing for the people. No, we put in crony governments that facilitate our looting of those countries. And that's how we operate. And I think China's fundamentally different. But, you know, we're just at the very beginning.
Well, I guess what I'm getting at here, Billy, is like I'm trying to find a point of agreement, because look, I would, you know, I actually know a libertarian billionaire that moved to China, moved his kids to China, wants to raise them in China because he sees the capitalist reforms that are happening there as a new frontier, so to speak, right? It's relatively unregulated from his perspective. That gives him the opportunity to really produce stuff and grow his business, while at the same time, I guess he would be growing China's economy. But at a certain point, you know, and look, I think that's great. I think, you know, if we had a capitalist country, you know, even if the government called themselves communists, but left me alone to run my business and do my thing, and didn't, you know, tax me too hard, I'd be like, okay, cool, whatever, call yourself whatever you want. But at a certain point, I'm looking and going, okay, is there a point where they're going to just take all my stuff and say, you're an enemy of the state, and unless you give up everything to the greater good or something like that, because we're now switching to abolishing private ownership and abolishing capitalism? Or is it something that occurs naturally? Because I could see, okay, I think I would disagree with you that people would want to move to, I mean, I know people are certainly more charitable when they're wealthier, like when they have more material abundance, they're more charitable. I lived for years in a community in northern Alberta called Fort McMurray, where we have sitting on the oil sands, which is like, I think, a larger oil reserve than Saudi Arabia. And so we were the community was flourishing. It's very well off per capita, the most charitable community in Canada, because along with that abundance comes a charitable spirit and wanting to share and stuff like that. People who are living in subsistence tend to not think much more past survival and what am I going to do tomorrow? So I could see things becoming more charitable, more sharing, all those kinds of things. Is that kind of the natural progression to communism, or is it
Well, I don't think we need to worry about the government of China, doing anything drastic to, violate human rights of the people. Because again, I mean, the only thing that could happen was if we got into a hot war with China, and then of course China is going to have to look at its own security, and people who collaborate with or who oppose the government obviously are going to be suspects and have to be dealt with, because for pragmatic self-defense. But in lieu of not an actual war and all the prosperity that China is currently enjoying, I see that the transition to communism would be good. Everybody is going to embrace it, and if people don't embrace it, why would the government do it? That's what I'm saying. So,
right.
So it's it's about doing things. So right now, if the people are happy, why are you going to force some kind of a change? So the forcing of the change is only going to happen if that change is beneficial for the vast majority. Well, that's nice.
Some positive comments. There's some people are getting something out of this, having a civil discussion here. Yeah, I think I'm going to have to get on with my day here shortly, and we'll certainly carry this conversation on into the future. One of the hopeful signs I'm seeing here is that we love the idea that capitalism can lead to a brighter tomorrow. I think what that tomorrow might look like, we might differ on, we might not differ that much on. I certainly could imagine people becoming more charitable and giving and sharing. And so if that's the case, I'm all for it, as long as there's no violent coercion that gets in the way of, if my flourishing has to go because of some master plan that some brainiac drew up about a utopian future, then I'm going to have something to say about it. But if
you sound like the feudalist that had to go,
yeah,
you're not happy with, and what I'm saying is sometimes, the entrenched powers that want to maintain a status quo that needs to be improved upon have to be dealt with force and coercion. And I'm not opposed to that. That's why I don't see that as a universal principle that always needs to be applied. I see that sometimes, like in feudalism, we need to overthrow, and same thing right now in the U.S. Like we need to overthrow our entrenched,
Were you in the Capitol on January 6th, Billy Bob? Were you one of the insurrectionists?
I was very sympathetic.
Yeah. I mean, those are populists, and look, a lot of anti-establishment people are getting to the breaking point. We're seeing a rise in kind of violent outbursts, even at my work. I live in a relatively peaceful province in a fairly flourishing society, but there's increased mental health crises. There's people outbursts of violence, and just actually this morning there was a stabbing that I saw one of our crews was going to, and that kind of thing is happening more and more. The system is under a lot of pressure. You get the sense that it's about to break, and I think Billy Bob and I both agree that what needs to come next is some unregulated capitalism to get us to a brighter tomorrow. And maybe we can leave a capitalism, Billy Bob, I will add, that is governed in a way that does not give any power to the wealthy and the corporate interests that wields
use force and coercion to, keep them in their place.
To combat any force and coercion that they might impose on the people. I will go that far with you. But
I think, yeah, because that's ultimately what it is. So I can agree with that.
Okay.
I can agree with that. I mean,
look at this.
I think we made some progress. Let's try and think about
Billy,
this.
we made progress without a third party pointing a gun at us and telling us we have to make progress. I'd just like to point that out as well.
That's okay. That went. I'm gonna have to dwell on that. I'm gonna have to dwell on that.
All right, guys. If you enjoyed the show, please leave a comment and let us know. I'm seeing some encouragement out there. People liking these conversations. They're difficult conversations. Part of my program, 75 Hard. My muscles are getting bigger. My brain's getting bigger. Talking with Billy. We're grinding it out here. So if you like that, here's Justin Turdo. Nice job, hosers. That's a Canadian compliment.
I've seen Beer, the movie Beer, so I'm familiar with hosers.
Very good. Awesome. All right, guys. Make sure you subscribe. Make sure you share. And we'll see you probably within a week or two. We'll do another one of these streams. All right. Talk to you later.
Thank you so much, Tim. I appreciate it.
No problem.